happening, guys? Today on the video we're going to talk about everything I hate about my 259D. Alright guys, let's talk a little bit about this 259D. This is a 2014 259D. Currently it has about 1,600 hours on it, and I bought it at 125 hours. So safe to say I've had this skid steer a lot. The work that I perform with this skid steer is a lot of residential, new construction work, a lot of grading for like landscaping, prep for landscaping, a lot of concrete prep and stuff like that. So there's a wide variety of jobs that I actually perform with this skid steer. So I absolutely love this skid steer. There is no doubt in my mind that Cat makes the best skid steer, hands down. So let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I don't really care for about this skid steer. And let's get into breakdowns. Now, breakdowns are few and far in between with this machine. I have not had too many breakdowns, you know, especially in 1,600 hours of, you know, everyday use that I've really put this skid steer kind of through its paces. Let's talk a little bit about what has broken down on me. The first thing that has broken down is I had a speed sensor go out, and it didn't really prevent the machine from running. It would just send an error code as you were running, so it didn't detune anything, so I was still able to finish performing my job at the time. So a speed sensor, so the speed sensor was actually behind one of the drive motors on the exterior side of the machine, in between the machine itself and the undercarriage up underneath the drive motor. So what happens is, I've heard you know, a lot of material can get stuck up in this drive, up, you know, behind the drive motor, and actually knock this speed sensor. You know, obviously there's wires that go to the speed sensor because it is electronic. And what happened was, obviously something got in there and just prevented that speed sensor from reading the correct speed or sensing the correct speed or whatever. So that was one issue. It cost me like, I want to say around like $500 or so, due to the fact that I had to send it into Cat, and I didn't fix it myself. The other thing that I have had, another problem that I've had with this machine, was I did have a hose blow at about 1,400 hours, and it was one of the hoses that goes from the actual drive motor itself down the exterior side of the machine into the machine and up to the actual pump motor. So this was essentially pretty much all the hydraulic you know, fluid goes from the pump motor to the drive motor, you know, and then, you know, that pretty much all that fluid is used to propel the drive motor, give the drive motor power. So it was a pretty easy fix. Obviously I had to take it apart on the exterior side of the machine, on the drive motor, and then lift the cap, and then you know, fish the line all the way through, and then attach it to the pump up underneath the cab. So I did have to lift the cab. Wasn't too hard of a project, but it was downtime. So let's talk a little bit about this machine and the only major breakdown that it's had. So this machine is a 74 horsepower machine, so it means that it doesn't have to have a diesel exhaust fluid, so it actually has a DPF without DEF. Well, there's a lot of complex components that go into the emission system of these machines, and one of it is a crankcase breather. So pretty much all the crankcase that, you know, when the motor's running and the crankcase is you know, pressurizing itself, it's not vented out, it's vented internally. Well, when this breakdown happened, it was actually negative 20 degrees outside, and I was plowing snow. So I had plowed snow for an entire day. The machine was parked overnight, temperatures were really cold, and the next day I went to start up the machine. I started up the machine, started fine. It was sitting on the trailer in my driveway. I went to hook up my truck to the trailer, and realized that as the machine was running, it was starting to throw blue smoke out the exhaust. And so I was kind of looking, you know, it was totally not normal for this machine to do that. So by the time I went and noticed that there was more smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe, I then realized that, hey, I better shut this machine down and we'll see, you know, see what is going on with it. So I actually shut the machine off, and then I went to the back of the machine. Well, at this point in time, the crankcase, since it hadn't vented and it didn't have a way to vent itself, all that pressure was just building up, and it started shooting the oil back out of the intake, because that's the only direction that that oil could come, is back up through the turbo and everything like that and out the intake. So here this machine went into the shop, and luckily it was covered under the 4,000 hour emissions. It's like a 5-year 4,000 hour emissions warranty, and due to the fact that this crankcase breather had to breathe internally due to the emissions requirements of these motors, luckily that was covered under warranty. It didn't do any motor damage. However, all the oil came out of the intake and the exhaust, and there's an intake port on the side of the machine, and so the machine was broken down for about 2 weeks. So how did we fix it? There's actually a recall or an update that puts a heater on your breather heater. So it's called a breather heater update. And in these early D models like the 2014, you can actually have them put in this breather heater update. So when you plug in your block heater, it actually has a heater that prevents that breather tube from the crankcase or the crankcase vent from freezing. And it also, when you plug in your block heater, it also heats up your oil. So on those, you know, on that note, that is the only major breakdown that this machine has had in 1,600 hours. Enough with the talking. I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, guys, let's take a look at this machine, and I'll kind of let you know what I was talking about earlier. So now behind here, in here, obviously you can tell this is the sprocket and the drive motor and everything. There are hoses that are right behind here that actually go into the machine. So all this dirt right here can pass through next to those hoses and get into the belly of the machine, which every time you go to lift the cab or go to change the oil or get into the belly of this machine, it is packed full of dirt. I mean, it is just packed full. You can tell down there. I mean, the bottom of this machine is just packed full of dirt. Whenever you get to your oil change below in there, you have to literally scrape all the dirt out of the inside of this machine before you can even get to the oil drain plug. That's one thing that I do not like about this machine, and these should be covered up in some way so the hose can go through there, but all the dirt can't. So I talked a little bit about a problem that I had with a speed sensor on one of these track drive motors. So I had a speed sensor go out. Well, where is that speed sensor? It is on the interior side of this machine. As you can tell, there's a hose right here. It's up back in between the machine itself and the drive motor, back in between there. So it was one of those fixes that definitely was tough to get to say the least, and I sent it off to Kat just because of how tough it would have been to fix it. So another thing that I really don't like is to have those sensors somewhere where you're obviously going to get dirt and mud and grime packed into such a tight area that's back there. You can tell, I mean, constantly that is just getting packed with mud and dirt in there. And you know, and not to mention it's an electrical sensor, and all the water and stuff gets up in there too. So that's another thing that I hate about this 259D. Another thing that I absolutely hate about this 259D is the radio on the inside of the cab. If you can see, up in here is the actual back of the radio itself. So it hooks into the cab, but it's exposed to the elements. The outside of the radio is on the outside of the firewall of the cab. So whenever you're washing this machine or whatever, the radio gets wet. And I've been through 3 different radios in this machine, and I just quit replacing them. You know, at $250 a piece, you know, why would I replace another radio, you know, in here? You know, move that radio somewhere where it's inside and protected. You know, it's one thing because these machines do rattle quite a bit, but maybe put the radio inside, and so it doesn't get all the dust and debris and water in the internals of the radio. Another thing that I hate about this 259D is the access to this oil filter. This oil filter is super hard to change. When you look at the back of this motor, I mean, you definitely have to get it in there, and then you have to flip the filter over the top. You got to drop it over the top and everything to get the filter on as it sits right there. It's just kind of a pain. There's no way to like pre-fill the filter, you know, or it's very, very, very tough to you know, A, take off the filter and not make a mess, and B, you know, get the new filter in there and lined up and screwed on straight. Another thing that I really don't care for on this 259D is what's missing. The windshield. So this windshield, I've actually been through 2 windshields, and breaking both of them were 100% my fault. The first one, I got it hung up on the arms of the machine down here when the door was open, shattered it. The other one is I was lifting a concrete power trowel by myself, obviously off of a dually truck, and the power trowel came back and hit the glass and broke it. But what I would like to see is a poly windshield that just won't shatter on you. You know, I think a poly windshield would definitely do the trick. And I know a lot of the forestry package machines have the poly windshields, but that's one thing that I would really like to see, you know, and just ends up costing you money when you break a windshield out. But obviously both times the windshield has been broken, it was 100% my fault. All right, guys, there you have it. Those are all the things I absolutely hate about my Cat 259D. Stay tuned for some more videos. Also, I'll do everything I love about this machine, which the list is a lot longer than the things I hate. So stay tuned for that video. It's coming up next.